I request you all to kindly rise for national anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, I request your attention for the recitation of Holy Quran.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
يؤتي الحكمة من يشاء ومن يؤت الحكمة فقد أوتي خيرا كثيرا وما يذكر إلا أولو الألباب.
He gives wisdom to whom He wills, and whoever has been given wisdom has certainly been given much good, and none will remember except those of understanding.
صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah. My name is Mahin Shafiq, and on behalf of President CAS, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, and the entire CAS team, I welcome you all to Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, CAS's seminar on Future of Pak-US Relations, Challenges and Opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, CAS is an independent and non-partisan think tank that envisions to serve as a thought leader. Our mission is to provide independent insight and analysis on aerospace and international security issues of both an immediate and long-term concern. Our core values are independence, analytical rigor, and foresight. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's session. Today's session will be moderated by Syed Muhammad Ali, Director, Nuclear and Strategic Affairs, CAS. Syed Muhammad Ali is an international policy analyst with rich experience of high-level, multilateral and bilateral negotiations on strategic and security issues with the United States, China, and India. His work on foreign, security, nuclear, and energy issues has been published and quoted by leading national and international think tanks, newspapers, and publications. I would now like to invite Syed Muhammad Ali, Director, Strategic and Nuclear Affairs, CAS, for his opening address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Chair, President CAS, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, distinguished speakers, respected guests, and my dear friends, Aslam. A very warm welcome on this early winter afternoon to discuss perhaps a very interesting, very dynamic and very complex relationship that affects Pakistan, this region, and perhaps also the world. I'm particularly delighted to welcome you all because after 18 months long COVID experience, which forced us indoors and made us resort to webinars and online seminars, this is perhaps the first time we are meeting face to face, and you will perhaps agree that there is no substitute to in-person discussion on a subject of this value and significance. So you must be wondering that why are we holding this seminar on a topic which has been discussed for so many years in different aspects. The reason and the unique attribute of CAS is that we are trying to offer a fresh look, a new prism to look at this complex relationship. Because traditionally this relationship has been seen from the security and geopolitical contexts. But today what we hope to do is to look comprehensively and also critically in terms of the four key aspects of this complex and cyclical relationship. We will discuss not just the geopolitical drivers, but also the socio-cultural aspects. How do the two value systems perceive and engage with each other? Also, the security dynamics, and perhaps the most interesting presentation that you will witness will be the political and economic cost of financial dependence and cooperation that Pakistan has sought for the last 7 decades with the US. So, therefore, today we will not just evaluate the substance of Pak-US relationship and its political, economic, cultural and security dimensions, but also offer a fresh perspective at the political, policy and cultural aspects of the legislative processes that collectively determine how the US views, perceives and deals with Pakistan. This will also perhaps help improve the quality of the policy discourse on Pak-US relationship by raising the public discourse beyond the discussion on the interaction of individuals, phone calls and occasional high-level engagements, and bring greater focus on the interagency processes which take place both in the Beltway and also in Islamabad before, during and after the engagements and dialogues. So hopefully we'll try to briefly also assess the implementation mechanism and the political and security cost for Pakistan of the dependence on the US financial assistance. So ladies and gentlemen, with the help of a very distinguished and illustrious panel, we will hope to have a very insightful, frank and open discussion on a very important relationship for Pakistan and also for the US, in order to identify new ideas and seek some new policy options that can help us improve our collective understanding of this complex and critical relationship and find ways that can help both countries manage, build and diversify this relationship despite a fluid world order, a turbulent Asia-Pacific situation, a precarious security environment in South Asia, and complex traditional and non-traditional security challenges that Pakistan faces. So hopefully we can identify some ways to convert them into opportunities. And lastly, I think it's also a very important time because we are expecting new ambassadors to take charge both in Washington and Islamabad shortly. So perhaps what new ideas and options can be identified which can bring a fresh impetus to the improvement of this very important and critical relationship. So with these few words, allow me the honor of introducing the chair of today's seminar, President CAS, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan. He brings rich experience in aviation and industrial management, diplomacy and negotiations. During his service, he has also remained on various important command and staff appointments, including serving as the Vice Chief of the Air Staff and Chairman Pakistan Aeronautical Complex Board. He has also served as Pakistan's Air Attaché in India. He is the co-author of 2 books, The Aviation City and Milestones, about the growth of military aviation industry in Pakistan and its way forward. Thank you for chairing this session, Marshal Farhat. And so without any further ado, now I'd like to introduce and invite the keynote speaker for today's seminar. And you'll probably agree that perhaps he's the most distinguished and respected member of Pakistan's diplomatic corps, Ambassador Inam-ul-Haq. He's a former foreign secretary as well as foreign minister, a career diplomat who has served with distinction in some of the very important capitals and cities, including as Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations and ambassador in China and Turkey. So, Ambassador Inam-ul-Haq, I have the honor of inviting you to deliver a keynote address which will encompass Pak-US relations in the context of emerging geopolitical dynamics and options for Pakistan. Ambassador Inam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished participants, the world that we are living in is passing through a period of stress, turmoil, and transition. And this has partly been brought about by the aggressive and ruthless policies pursued by the United States and its allies in the wake of 9/11, particularly in the Middle East and in our region. The present age is being variously described by thinkers, writers, intellectuals as an age of uncertainty, disillusionment, anger, discord, disruption, and even fragmentation. Liberal beliefs and policies are on the retreat, and there is an ominous rise of ultranationalism, xenophobia, authoritarianism, populism, racism, far-right extremism, and even neo-fascism, particularly in the West. Democracy is being pushed back. Elected but authoritarian leaders have taken over in many major countries, and relations among major powers are increasingly marked by distrust, suspicion, and even hostility. In this uncertain world, existential threats to humankind and its habitat, the planet Earth, are growing rapidly, but receiving insufficient attention. And these threats include an unsustainable world population, nuclear war, climate change and global warming, pandemics like COVID-19, cyber threats and attacks and the possibility of cyber wars, food shortages, desertification and mass migration, and the possibility of another financial meltdown which will destroy economies indiscriminately and trade and tariff wars. And finally, the deepening rich and poor divide, both within and among countries, with money funneling upwards instead of trickling downwards. The finite resources of this planet are being overused. These include fresh water, which is becoming scarce and which would convert arable land into deserts, food shortages, depletion of fish stocks in the seas, overmining of mineral resources, decaying infrastructure, and reduction in living space availability. Instead of working together to prevent, if not overcome, the universal and existential threats and move towards a more cooperative, equal, and peaceful world, powerful states are working at cross purposes, feverishly building strategic alliances to protect their perceived political, economic, and financial interests. The efficacy of international forums like the United Nations and other multilateral forums is eroding. Economic sanctions and military threats against weaker states are increasingly used as coercive instruments to attain short-sighted national policy objectives. In this complex and threatening situation, the most important and defining relationship in the world today is the relationship between the United States and China, the two most powerful countries of the world, which appear to be on a path of confrontation, a path being relentlessly pursued by the United States in an effort to maintain its dominant position as the sole superpower in the world. We are at an inflection point of history, and my remarks today on the emerging geopolitical dynamism and options for Pakistan will primarily focus on the contest for supremacy between the United States and China, and a subset of relationship flowing from this overall rivalry in our own region, in the context of Pak-US relations, Pakistan-India relations. President Biden has described US relationship with China as that being of extreme competition. The interim National Security Strategic Guidance issued in June 21 by the United States notes that China is the only country potentially capable of challenging the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological supremacy of the United States, and therefore must be confronted. The US Congress has labeled China as the greatest geopolitical and geo-economic challenge to the United States. And an intense competition, both security and economic, has developed in every facet of their relationship between these two countries. This is pure competition for power. There is nothing more noble idea behind it. It is not a battle between good and evil as some want to describe it. A Cold War II has begun. And this Cold War will be much more intense than the last one, because China is economically much stronger than the Soviet Union was at the apex of its power. Today, the United States views China and Russia as the primary threats to its status as the sole superpower and its hegemonic policies. In the United States' self-appointed role of the leader of the free world and of a so-called rule-based world order. These rules were framed by the United States and its allies in the wake of their victory in World War II and were designed to control the political and economic landscape of the world. This order was and is based on alliances, international financial institutions like the World Bank, IMF, IFC, ADB, and norms of international behavior established by the US and its allies. And this order is now being openly challenged, both by China and by Russia. In fact, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, rejected the so-called rule-based world order at the United Nations General Assembly this year and declared that for Russia, the United Nations Charter provided the only rules which it would abide by. Let's take a brief look at US-China relations. The US is feverishly building alliances, particularly since the assumption of office by Joe Biden. President Donald Trump had started the process of decoupling American economy from the Chinese economy and had imposed various economic sanctions on Chinese exports to the United States. President Biden has carried that policy forward and has in fact persuaded other countries to join it. Trump was known for alienating allies. President Biden is trying to build up alliances. Let me mention a few. Recently, the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, in an interview to the Financial Times, stated that NATO defense ministers had adopted a new policy which would be endorsed by the NATO summit next year for the next decade, in which China would become a major adversary of NATO. He said that China was coming closer to Europe because of its closeness to the Arctic, because of its long-range missiles, and because of its trade practices, etc. So NATO is adopting a new doctrine supporting that of the United States to confront China. We all know about the Indo-Pacific strategy and the Quad, which comprises the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. Since the taking over of Mr. Biden as the President of the United States, there have been two summits of Quad. One a virtual summit in March this year and another in September this year, which was in person. Although the communiques of Quad do not make a mention of China by name, there is no hiding the fact that Quad is primarily aimed against China. Recently, a trilateral group was established called Abbas. Australia, United Kingdom and the United States, by which the United States would provide Australia technology and the wherewithal to build 8 nuclear-powered submarines to patrol the oceans. Thus, moving upwards the tensions in the area, and particularly between Australia and China, and in the process alienating France, which felt hurt by the fact that it had lost a contract which according to some was worth $37 billion and according to others almost $60 billion. But Abbas is not just building up nuclear submarines. It also includes cooperation in cyber warfare, in artificial intelligence, and in quantum computing. As such, it is a security organization aimed primarily at China. Even more recently, a new Quad was established, the Quad for the Middle East, which comprises the United States, India, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates. While the objectives of this Quad are not yet clear, it would be possible to derive from its establishment that it is aimed against the countries of the region, perhaps Iran, perhaps China, perhaps Pakistan. And finally, there is the Summit for Democracies. President Biden is trying to present this struggle as a struggle of democracies against authoritarianism. Democracies representing the West and authoritarianism representing China. And in this Summit of Democracies, I suspect Pakistan will not be one of the invitees. There are 5 areas of possible kinetic or military confrontation between China and the United States. I will simply list them because you are all aware of them. First, of course, is Taiwan. Under the One China policy and under the three declarations adopted between China and the United States accepts Taiwan as a part of China. But recently, Biden and yesterday, the Chief of the Defense Staff of the United States, General Jalil, stated that if Taiwan was under attack, the United States would defend it. This was the first time that the United States has openly stated that it would defend Taiwan against any Chinese aggression. This, of course, will rile up China, and China has already responded sharply to these statements. The second is the South China Sea and China's claim to the 9-dot line, which is most of South China Sea, which is challenged by other countries surrounding the South China Sea, as well as by the United States under the freedom of navigation under the law of the sea. And an incident at sea would lead to a confrontation and perhaps even a conflict. The third is East China Sea, in which China claims islands which are at present under Japanese administration and occupation. Japan calls them Senkaku Islands and China calls them Ryukyu Islands. And there is the so-called Socotra Rock, which is claimed by South Korea. And the final one is the maritime lines of communications, because China is dependent on oil from the Persian Gulf. And if these lines of communications came under threat, or if the Straits of Malacca came under threat, China would be forced to take action to open these lines of communication, which would lead to a conflict. Then there are 3 areas in which China comes under pressure from the West. The European Union, which had signed an investment agreement with China, has postponed the ratification of that agreement. There is competition in technology also. We all remember that the CFO of Huawei was arrested and kept under arrest for 3 years. She was recently released. And that was over G5 communications and networking technology. There is the possibility of cyber attacks against each other. There is the artificial intelligence, quantum physics, hyperglide weapons, autonomous weapons, etc. What does China want in the world? We have talked about what the United States would want to do. China, as you know, has emerged as the most powerful country in the world economically. In purchasing power terms, its economy is already 1/6 larger than that of the United States. In PPP terms, the US economy is about $22 trillion and the Chinese economy exceeds $26 trillion. In nominal dollar terms, China is expected to overtake American economy by the end of this decade. China is enlarging its military budget. It is developing a blue water navy. It's developing stealth weapons. It's developing artificial intelligence. And recently it undertook an experiment which it described as meant for civilian use, but the West has described it as a hyperglide experiment. But what does China want? And the answers are very simple. China wants the same things as any major power wants. To become possibly the most powerful country in the world, first in the region economically and militarily, and perhaps become a regional hegemon, and later on a superpower in the world. It wants access to resources. And I mentioned the depletion of resources in the world, so it is foraging far and wide on the African continent, in other countries, to get resources from wherever it can for its population and for its development. These resources are oil, minerals, land to grow food, and means to protect its access to these resources through military, naval, and air power. It wants to become the leading technological power, both in military and in the civilian domain. And therefore, it is making huge investments in research and development of artificial intelligence, cyber, space, and autonomous weapons, etc. And it wants a new order which is more favorable to it and less favorable to the West, or at least on equal terms with the West. And finally, it wants to get back the territories that it believes belong to China and were forcibly taken away when China was weak and subjugated. It has already gotten back Hong Kong and Macau. It hoped to get back Taiwan at some stage, and we all know the line of actual control battles that China has with India and its claims on Arunachal Pradesh. Would China be willing to go to war to achieve its objectives? The answer at present is no. But it can be conceived that at some future stage, if it feels strong enough to win the war without attracting widespread destruction, it might undertake limited conflicts. And the 5 areas that I mentioned kinetically are those limited conflicts that China might wish to undertake. Now let's come to a subset of relations of Pakistan, India, and the United States and China. The United States has decided to include India as a strategic partner in its contest with China, and India has willingly joined that partnership. Pakistan is also seen as a country which is strategically very close to China. Therefore, we should look at Pak-US relations in the future in the light of American interests in the area and in the light of its partnership with India and in the light of its confrontation with China. We should not be taken in by any soft words that may be uttered by some Americans at some stage when they come to Pakistan. I think the relationship was best described by Wendy Sherman in India, in Bombay, in a public talk, in response to a question. She was asked why she was going to Pakistan and what kind of relationship would US have with Pakistan. And she responded in the following manner. One, she was coming to Pakistan with a very specific and narrow purpose. Two, there was no question of re-hyphenation of Pakistan-India relations. They were in different categories. Three, there was no possibility of a broad-based engagement with Pakistan. Fourth, the United States was seeking facilities to ensure security, including the security of India. The United States is now negotiating with Pakistan also on behalf of India to ensure India's security. And finally, she said that India will be fully briefed on her visit to Pakistan and the results of it. US relations with India today are deep. They have signed 4 foundational agreements in the military field. They are broad, they are robust, energetic and meaningful. These are the words of Wendy Sherman. And that the United States has no partner better than India. You can draw your own conclusions. We should be under no illusions that the United States will suddenly one day turn around and say, no, we made a mistake. We want Pakistan to be a close friend of the United States. To add to this equation is the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. The US has to blame this withdrawal on someone and do better than Pakistan. And now it is making some demands on Pakistan on airlines of communication, etc. Pakistan itself is following a very strange policy of bending over backwards, not to try to please the world, but to try to please the Taliban and to persuade the world to accept them as the rulers of Afghanistan, while itself, Pakistan has not recognized the Taliban. We should let go of this notion that we speak on behalf of Afghanistan. The Taliban can do their own talking. They conducted negotiations with the United States in Doha very successfully. They can conduct their own diplomacy. Let them do it. We should not be seen to be advocating their case in the world. We should be concerned with the fact that Afghanistan is going to be a problem for Pakistan in the future also. Afghanistan is confronted with a famine. And if the world does not come to its assistance, then that means there will be a major exodus from Afghanistan into Pakistan. So we should be ready to receive millions of refugees. The UNHCR is already telling us to open our borders to Afghan refugees. I believe that we should firmly tell the international community, which has led us on a garden path in the past as well, that refugee camps should be established inside Afghan territory and the international community should look after them inside Afghanistan. What are Pakistan's options? Do we go for China or do we opt for the United States? As I stated earlier, even if you opt for the United States is not going to reciprocate much, but let us look at the facts. Pakistan's economic relationship is very strong with the West. We have almost a $1.5 billion surplus of more than $6 million of trade with the United States. We have a similar surplus with the European Union of more than $10 billion of trade. With China, our trade has a negative balance of about $14 billion every year after the second FTA. Pakistan is still economically dependent on the IMF, on the World Bank, on the ADB and other international financial institutions. So our economy is primarily skewed towards the West. But we have received major support from China under CPEC and also bilaterally whenever we have needed financial bailouts. I was looking at the debt figures, and China, in fact, has almost 24% of our $122 billion debt. So we are caught in this cleft. Unless we set our own house in order, we will have no options to make any choices. We will be buffeted from one side to the other and come under pressure from both sides. And it will be an extremely difficult choice to make. It will be a hostile choice, and it will not be possible for us to live through that choice for very long, because we are equally dependent both on the West and on China. Our military, our defense preparedness is deeply linked to that of China. Our borders are next to China. China has a problem with India, we have a problem with India. So logic would dictate that we should side with China. But our economic vulnerabilities would perhaps force us to try to remain neutral. And that is why Pakistan must make an effort to gather together a group of countries in the world to ensure that the push between the United States and China does not come to a shove. And be sure that if we move towards the United States, we will become a vessel of India, because the US will operate through India in this region. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Inam, for a very candid and comprehensive review of the global geopolitical dynamics and its very serious implications for this region, and some critical choices that Pakistan confronts at this point in time. So I think this has comprehensively set the tone for today's seminar, because our distinguished keynote speaker has covered the geopolitical, the technological, the strategic and the military dimensions and its implications as well. So that brings me to the second speaker, who is going to look at an aspect of Pak-US relationship which is often overlooked in our greater focus on politics and security, which is the value systems of the two nations. What are the areas of convergences on which we can build a relationship, or at least attempt one? And you'll probably agree there's no person more suited and more respected intellectual to help us understand this socio-cultural dimension of Pak-US relationship. So I'd like to invite Senator Javed Jabbar, former Federal Minister for Information and Broadcasting, to share with us his insightful assessment of the socio-cultural dimension of Pak-US relationship. Earlier, he has served in 3 federal cabinets as Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Science and Technology, Petroleum and Natural Resources, and also as an advisor to the Chief Executive of Pakistan on national affairs. He's a frequent writer, a prolific and sought-after expert on identity and value-related subjects. Senator Javed.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, Inam-ul-Haq, Jilani, Air Vice Marshal Shahzad, Chaudhry, Usman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be with you. I thank the head of the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, the Air Marshal, for his gracious invitation. And I see before me a remarkable assembly of both serving and retired officers of the civil and the armed forces of Pakistan, and a multi-generational audience representing different age groups, different vocations. There is a paucity, as usual, of women, because it is a male chauvinist gathering, except for this one brave woman seated in the front row. The other women have not been permitted to advance to the front rows, exclusively reserved for male chauvinists. But that's the nature of the armed forces. Even though we have a woman as Surgeon General, a remarkable change, First Lieutenant General. So change is in the air. And Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, I think, is setting a very fine example of taking forward this process of discourse, of conducting research, training a fine cadre of young scholars who've come here from the National Defense University or other universities, building our intellectual capital. And this seminar, convened on a very relevant, important, timely subject, has been so even an illiterate, poor woman in Pakistan will know the word Coca-Cola. She may or may not drink it or afford it, but she knows what Coca-Cola is. Coca-Cola is an American drink. And now increasingly, good old McDonald's, Marshal. Wow. McDonald's is creating a new kind of fast food culture in our country. And in reciprocity, alas, except for occasional interactions by the great Muslim Fateh Ali Khan, who was asked to compose music and also sing in a couple of Hollywood films, 2 impacts in cinema created by our very own Sharmeen Chenoy, who won 2 Academy Awards for documentaries, partly offset by the fact that some cynics in Pakistan, skeptics, say, but she got those Oscars only because there were bad stories to tell about Pakistan. Honor killings, facial or attacks by acid attack victims, which is unfair to her. But there's also a grain of truth there, because it satisfied the vicarious American appetite for bad news from Pakistan. Nothing like bad news from Pakistan. So let's give it an award. I'm perhaps being cynical, but I think I'm also being partly correct. Our impact in reciprocal terms is very, very sporadic and very occasional. And perhaps the US is the only major English-speaking country which does not love cricket. It doesn't even understand cricket. And we have no clue about this crazy American football. It looks like body bashing is a better term for it. And we have no passion for baseball. So one element that would have drawn us together, sports. Like sports draws together India and Pakistan. I mean, almost mortal enemies, even they can cheer their respective teams together, India versus Pakistan. But we have no similar benefit except very, very limited in terms of tennis sometimes, what have you. So it's a very kind of imbalanced cultural exchange. We have plenty of Pakistanis with strong connections with America. Yes, most of them belong to the upper middle class and the rich class. Many of them, I'm sure, well represented here. They don't really represent the kind of people who went out to the Middle East and together with their friends in America, are so gracious. They give us more money than our exports do overseas Pakistanis. But Pakistani Americans are another breed. They are not the manual worker types. They are very educated, sophisticated, specialized. Many of them have contributed outstandingly to America's science, technology. It's not as well known as it deserves to be, to medicine, to banking, to finance, and reciprocally, of course. Sometimes we've had the US citizenry represented in Pakistan, with a range stretching from the 1960s when Norman Borlaug gave us a special species of wheat and helped the Green Revolution to boost productivity. And missionaries, US missionaries in Pakistan. One of them, Dr. Jonathan Appleton, has written a superbly sensitive book about Pakistan. It's called A Far and Distant Place. And he's very much around. He lives in Lahore at the former Christian college. But these are far and few between. Yeah, thank you. It says, respected sir. You should not have the word respected. It even says, kindly conclude 5 minutes or you will be forcibly removed from the podium. Because it's about the US-Pakistan relationship, I'm very willing to face force in the face and defy it. So Pakistan is in the US. But to be fair to the US, it's also been very supportive of our scholars, students, the Fulbright Scholarship Program. Sometimes they claim it's the largest of all countries, of the 155 countries that they support through the Fulbright Scholarship. And since 1946, about 325,000 scholars from all over the world have gone to the US, but so have hundreds from Pakistan benefited from this exposure to the US. And in two respects, outside the scholarship program, I'm familiar with, for example, an institution that I have the privilege of being associated with in Karachi called the National Academy of Performing Arts, of which Zia Mohyuddin is our founder. I serve on the board. We have a marvelous relationship with the University of Texas and the Butler School of Music, which has invited young music students from Pakistan and music teachers, and we welcome them to our country. And that's an example of what used to happen with great jazz heroes like Duke Ellington, who came to Pakistan back in the 60s. We have the example of the US supporting the Center for Excellence in Journalism in Karachi, of which I'm also a member of the board, and they've rendered great service. And on a purely personal note, about 1976, when most of you were up in heaven, I happened to write, produce and direct Pakistan's first English language cinema film called Beyond the Last Mountain. And over the years, this terribly incompetent person that I am, I lost or damaged all the prints of the film. And I was very sad. I only had a damaged print. Until 2 years ago, I get a call from the Lincoln Arts Center in New York. And they say, Mr. Jabbar, are you the same person who produces them? I said, yes. I said, well, we have a complete print of your film in our archives. What would you like us to do with it? Fantastic. I mean, for almost 40 years, the Americans have helped preserve a Pakistani cinema film. And it was like a gift from heaven. But not only have they done that, they've been so courteous, and supportive, and helpful in helping me to begin the process of digitizing the film. I don't want to fall into the trap of taking a narrow, personal, anecdotal experience and replicating it on a larger scale and saying, you know, the Americans aren't so bad after all. I completely endorse Mr. Inam-ul-Haq's observations on the US strategic view of Pakistan. And let me say this very explicitly, I condemn the tone and the attitude of Wendy Sherman, both in India and in Pakistan, condescending, patronizing, reflecting the absolute appalling inability of the United States, despite having the world's finest higher education system, some of the best think tanks, the inability to understand Pakistan and its significance for the region. I condemn that. But at the same time, I want to say that the American relationship with social, cultural work brings up the question on which I will probably conclude before I'm hauled off the stage, which is the value system. But first of all, do social and cultural values actually affect state policy? We think they should, but states, alas, do not act according to societal values and preferences. States are cold-hearted. They cannot afford to think about values. Of course, they talk about human rights, and sometimes they are compassionate. But when it comes to the irreducible element of state interest, social, cultural values take second place. And it's such a pity, because in some respects, the societies of the United States and Pakistan, with all the contrasts, the economic contrasts, the other contrasts, there is a commonality. In parts of America, despite the fragmentation of the family and the demographic changes, there is a core set of values of decency, civility, respect for the family, respect even for religion. But when it comes to religion, we diverge completely. One example illustrates it all. In America, for a large segment of the population, as reflected on their television and cinema, on the theater, the name of the Holy Prophet Jesus is often juxtaposed with abusive four-letter words. It pains a Muslim to hear that, but that's become part of the lexicon of American culture. Jesus is also an exclamation mark. It's an exclamation mark. My God, Jesus is me. That would be unthinkable in terms of value practice in Pakistan or any other Muslim country for that matter. Because we respect Jesus as a holy prophet. So, how do we look at the future? I think we need to be very vigilant, as Inam-ul-Haq Sahib has said so rightly. We need to maintain our economic interests, unfortunately, until we can do better and mobilize this vast potential that we have. Our official GDP is about 300 billion plus, but in actual terms, it is well over $1 trillion. We are so good at evading documentation of the economy. We have much more money piled up in the middle classes of Pakistan than is ever visible. And that brings me to the very last contrast. My God, tax culture. That too is part of culture. The tax culture of the United States is a model for the world. The Internal Revenue Service will instill the fear of God in every American citizen. MashaAllah. In Pakistan, we have what? We have about 40 million families, and let us say 20 million, 25 million are poor, too poor to pay taxes. We still have 15 million, the middle class, upper middle, lower. 15 million to 20 million, 1 million pay taxes, 19 million don't even bother. So, to conclude, I think to retain the social cultural connections that we have with people both in Pakistan loving America and hating America, a remarkable paradox. On the political level, we hate America for its support to Israel, for its unwillingness to not support Kashmir, its terrible biases in favor of India, and yet we have lines of people wanting visas, green cards, US passports. Great paradox. Especially when it comes to China. China, the great friend of Pakistan, and we have no similar cultural communication with China. We don't speak the language. We don't see Chinese movies. We don't know the stars of China's cinema. And we are so engrossed in Facebook and Google every day that America is pervasive. What a contrast. So the love-hate relationship will continue. But Pakistan has to do much more. More, Syed. Pakistan has to do more. But this time we should be telling ourselves to do more, to present the reality of Pakistan, the beauty of Pakistan, the complexity of Pakistan. We have chairs for Pakistan studies lying vacant for years in US universities because our government has not got around to deciding who to send. My God, utter disgrace. We have vacancies in US campuses where Indians are dominating the scene. So, we can't blame anyone, we blame ourselves. We haven't done enough in media, we never purchased space in the New York Times to put out advertisements, talk about the Euro disinformation lab, so many issues. We don't project the beauty of the Dubai Expo Pavilion of Pakistan. What a masterwork. We don't use mainstream media, and we have no right to blame anyone. $1 invested to project our culture in the US will fetch us $10 in return. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Jabbar, for enlightening us with a very thought-provoking and honest comparison of Pakistan and US cultures and value systems. I think it really added value to a brilliant and comprehensive geopolitical expose of the world order and region that was earlier articulated by the keynote speaker. And that helps us understand why, despite such complex paradoxes, in some aspects of our lifestyle, we are technologically and intellectually dependent on the US. So the dependence is not restricted to our weapon systems or access to export markets, but perhaps number of social media tools and reference for the products that they produce and we take pride in using. Perhaps in terms of building a similar relationship with China, a similar, a deeper or more balanced relationship and appreciation and understanding of their value system would be required. So that brings me to the opportunity to invite the third speaker, one of the finest stars of CAS, a young scholar, Dr. Usman Chohan, who is going to help us understand the economic dimension of Pak-US relationship. And let me warn you, it will be interesting because it will not just be a boring review of what we have received from the US in terms of financial assistance, but also a very interesting and insightful contrast in terms of the three pillars of our economic relations: our export remittances, our diaspora remittances, and also the financial assistance that we have received, and most interestingly, what is the security and political cost of economic dependence on the US? So Dr. Usman, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Chair, President Cass, esteemed panel members, my dear audience. I have a presentation prepared, slideshow. So we'll just wait for that to come up. So the text has gone topsy-turvy, but the cartoon is still in place. Hillary is with her staff and she's saying, friends, allies, partners, let's get creative. I need you guys to be creative. Well, vice versa. It's time for us to be creative as well and see what are the economic dimensions of Pak-US engagement. So, next slide. Not working. Oh, very good. The outline has 4 parts. There are 3 pillars of economic engagement with them. There's trade, as you would conventionally understand. There's remittance. There is financial regimes, which is the FATF and IMF, and prospects near-term and long-term, which is a synthesis of what we're talking about. So on the graph here you have from the Census Bureau how, this is from the United States perspective, so what is up is what they sell to us, and what is below, the negative on the y-axis is what they take from us, and so they are at a deficit. The United States runs a deficit with just about every country, but they politicize the deficit with China above all. It has grown, it grew especially after 2001, but then flattened by 2007. It's been in that sort of waves since then. And you won't be able to capture the scope of this unless I put a comparator, and the comparator with this I put is Bangladesh. So 2 sisters with a common history, and the deficit that the United States runs with Bangladesh has accelerated so much. And there are, you can say, cognate categories of products, textile, apparel, that sort of thing. They're not particularly high value added, not particularly sophisticated, but if they have trade relations, look at the acceleration with Bangladesh. That's very important for me to see what does it mean to trade a lot. And now we can talk about in terms of partnerships, who is bigger for whom. So we are their 55th largest supplier of goods. There are 54 other countries they'll keep in mind in terms of what they're getting from whom. And it's roughly the same for export as well. And the categories are also not particularly sophisticated either way. Not like we're getting that much high-tech stuff from them, and vice versa. So it's a low complexity, you could say steady growth, but not too impressive, and nothing to write home about, at least from their perspective. Now I'll see it from our perspective. The lack of diversification is a problem, and the trading relationship is less important in their eyes, but for us, they are the biggest export partner. And for us, they're still an important import partner. What I mean to say is they are the ones that take the most from us, and in terms of what they give to us, they're also significant. So from our point of view, it's still very important, as Inam-ul-Haq also pointed out, And we can find ways, this is what I'm getting at. I'm not trying to be a negative Nancy. The point is that there is plenty of scope to increase the complexity, the size, the diversification of the whole. But it requires, it's not a state-led project, it's the private sector that really needs to up its game. My observations about the private sector here have been that they've been very comfortable selling their towels and their knitwear. But it's the 21st century. I would like to see us go into the 21st century things. It really matters now what you're giving to them. And the United States is willing to run that deficit to just about everybody, so we should be working on trade. Then there's the other element of how we gain foreign exchange, which is remittances. So on the far right, from your perspective, you see that it's gone from in FY10 to FY20, from about 9 billion to 23 billion. Because we export, in a sense, labor. And some of it is high quality and some of it is less so, blue collar stuff. And the distribution here, there are two pie graphs. So the United States, in the middle of the pandemic, was 16%. Pandemic sort of dying down, it's 10%. And remittances from the United States are not the most important. The Gulf is, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. There are reasons for that that are structural. One is that if you're migrating to the United States, you're taking your family with you, you become a United States citizen, you're not sending money to anybody here. It's one reason. Second is that you may be more likely to settle down there rather than sending back here. You will therefore purchase a home there and do other things that require investment of your capital there. Those are structural things. But still, the fact that we're exporting blue collar to the Gulf still matters more. And the graph, the main driver behind that is the Gulf, it's not the United States. So, the socioeconomics is what I was talking about, make it less important. Now the financial regime, so this is, what am I really getting at with these three things, trade, remittance, and financial regimes, is that there are three ways for us to have the holy United States dollar, which is required for oil. It's required for payment to other countries. Like, this world is still seen through the prism of the dollar. Two of the things I talked to you about. The third one is not trade per se, but it limits how many dollars you can bring in. This is a list of IMF programs since 1958. The first many decades, so until the 2001 you might say, they were not particularly large amounts. One of the programs was for $100,000. Even adjusting for inflation, that's not a big deal. In 2001, it became a very large program, part 9/11, part the regime that was here, part war, etc. There are many factors that describe why. And the IMF dependency has become very large. And right now we're in an extended fund facility where the conditions are very tough. You have to cut subsidies to the poor, you have to get really, as far as stabilizing your structural budget deficit, they're asking for a lot. And it didn't used to be that way. So, that history is okay if you're a lender of last resort for small interventions, but now the size has become larger and larger, and it's also the role that the IMF plays in societies. Prior to the petrodollars, before 1981, they really were an emergency lending thing. But the petrodollar circulation created that, and they had to lend somehow, so they've also taken up a kind of dealer-merchant attitude. I need somebody to lend to, okay, this is the country, I'll lend to it, and let's see what happens. Parallel to that is a timeline of the FATF from 2008 to 2021, and when have we been in the gray list? So it's the most years. Why would I put the FATF and IMF? The IMF is a legitimate treaty body that we're a part of. The FATF is not, but the IMF legitimizes the FATF. It says that for the EFF, their extended fund facility, you need to be compliant with FATF. So suddenly, this body gets that legitimacy. And it is a very important political tool for strangulation of countries. And it's not just us anymore. Turkey has just gone on the grey list too. It's a bigger thing now. So these institutions working in unison make sure that you have a noose around your neck in terms of the access to dollars. And the irony is, before I proceed, the irony is that the world is awash in dollars. 40% of dollars that have ever existed came into circulation last year for COVID. Dollars are like oxygen, but you are being strangulated, so when you're not able to breathe, then even oxygen is a very precious thing. That's where we're at. Dollars are a cheap thing to breathe, but because of these regimes, plus the small scale of trade and remittances, it's hard to breathe. This slide was done with proper text, but the download hasn't worked out. So, so Mohammed was alluding to the point that what are the costs and the benefits of this? Well, the aid has gone away, right? The aid, whatever the aid was put into the economy, where is it? But the conditions that came with it, such as the Kerry-Lugar bill and all these things, those conditions didn't expire. So the benefits were shorter term and the costs were long term, that's the first thing. But if I give you a scope just verbally of how much this has cost us, it's far larger than whatever benefits you are getting. So it's been off-kilter in that sense. So there's a time horizon thing and there's a scope thing. So as an accountant would do, thank God the text is okay on this slide. So 4 episodes since 1945, and we became independent in 47. Pakistan and US relations, you know the history perhaps better than I do, but the first 2 episodes, it worked out fine in terms of relationship, but the war on terror, the Obama years particularly, so episode 3 has been difficult economically, as I'm only speaking on behalf of the economic prism. But the 4th episode has now begun, which is the US-China trade war, or US-China economic rivalry, which was alluded to and spoken about actually at length by Sir Inam-ul-Haq correctly. In that, all relationships of the United States that are bilateral will be seen through the prism of China, which means that you may be, all countries may feel that they need to align themselves. Ideally, most countries would maximize their gains by being on good terms with both. So why does it matter who is going to be more powerful, less powerful economically going forward? At CAS, we had a project to forecast out the economies as part of something bigger that we did at CAS. And my task was to look at the economic projections. So what I've drawn here, the blue is United States, red is China, saffron is India, and Pakistan is the gray, bull and bear. The bear is, if you don't fix anything, where are you at? And bull is if you make a lot of positive changes, which is a 5-hour, 6-hour long discussion, you will end up there. So the scope of things means that China will overtake. This was forecasting that was done early pandemic. Things have changed since then, but at that time, 2030 was around the time, as Sir Inam-ul-Haq. The US is still the foremost economic power. But then China accelerates far, far ahead. And the US banking on India, which was alluded to, spoken about at length by Sir Inam-ul-Haq, look at its scope in 2050 versus China in 2020. In 2050, it will attain an economic size China had last year. And they want this country to rival that. So they are also deluded, profoundly deluded. The Indians and the United States backing them up. But this question comes to us. And by 2050, if things go well, we'll have an economy as big as India does today. But think about what that means. That's actually very impressive. All of India's economic activity packed into this country would be remarkable. So how things are emerging means that we have to weigh the possibilities of engaging to the maximum with both countries, but the long term, this is how the horizon should come. My forecasts aren't perfect because I don't have a crystal ball, but this is where I would see things go. And there's a lot of math behind that. So, okay. My recommendations come into 3 lenses, therefore. With China, I say that you remove the bottlenecks with CPEC and really work with them. You know, you push through the projects, and we talk about a phase 1, 2, 3, and we're in phase 2, but there should be a 5, 6, 7 phase. It's a long-term engagement, multifaceted. We haven't explored the full breadth of it yet, and we have made things difficult for the Chinese here, which is unfair, and it's not in our long-term interest. The second is that I don't believe that you should shutter the windows on the United States. It's not that they are, yes, they are important in terms of trade right now, but that trade isn't that large in scale. The point is that there are opportunities for us to work with America that are in our own interest, not with a gun to our heads. For example, working on climate change and renewable energy, that is in our interest. Or investing in girls' education, which is a very big deal to America, but it's also probably the most important social driver of our economy. Work with America on that. There are actually many areas where we can work. And then that house and order cliche, I don't like to draw on the cliche, but it is very important to have the house in order, the ease of doing business, the institution. I mean, I would require 6 hours to go through the amount of research we've done at CAS on these subjects. There's just so much to do, but do it. And that's it for me. Thank you.
I'd like to particularly thank Dr. Usman for sharing his very interesting analysis despite his poor health. Thank you for making it. And I think Dr. Usman, you'll agree, has reinforced two very important points made by our keynote speaker. While the Hobson choice was mentioned between China and the US, perhaps what was reinforced with a lot of deep analysis by Dr. Usman is the reality that China does not offer Pakistan the proportionate market access to our export products that the US continues to do. And in case of greater security cooperation and dependence on China, will the US continue to allow us unrestricted access to the largest export market that we currently enjoy? That is the second part. And I think a very important lesson for me from this presentation is that instead of relying and expecting too much from the increasingly politically costly financial assistance from the US, it is the domestic house in order that needs to be, addressed in order to optimize our export potential and optimally exploit the market access that we have, because that does not have a economic cost. Thank you so much, Dr. Usman. And that brings me to the next speaker on a topic which perhaps most of this audience will find most interesting, our favorite topic, the security dimension of Pak-US relationship. And you'll perhaps agree that the speaker whom we have invited to help us understand it afresh is perhaps one of the most prolific writers, most astute analyst, and one of the most articulate speakers that Pakistan Air Force has produced. Air Vice Marshal Shahzad Chaudhry, a leading defense and security analyst who appears regularly on national media on topics of regional and global politics, defense and security. Before retirement from Air Force, he held prominent positions such as Deputy Chief of the Air Staff Operations and Director General of the Air Force Strategic Command. Sir, without further ado, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. It's a great privilege to be invited to this seminar along with the Galaxy audience that we have here, audience as well as the speakers. I see a lot of my old colleagues and seniors as well as peers sitting in front, so it's a great privilege to be once again in your midst. The topic that has been given to me strictly is to look at the security aspect, and while the security aspect is in fact much larger and deeper, it's got a changed meaning all these years. What Dr. Chohan just mentioned was also very much part of the security aspect of any nation these days. But I'm going to limit myself to the operational and doctrinal aspects only, very strictly security in the terms and in the ways that we all understand security. And when you talk about Pak-US, we understand what security really means for us and for them perhaps as well. So in that sense, I will restrict myself and I will try and cover as much of areas as possible within the given time. Now, a couple of points before that. Relation between countries are interstate, strictly interstate relations. People-to-people contact or people-to-people relations either add to that relation or perhaps act as a check only. But essentially, these relations are interstate relations, which really take us to the point that opinion and sentiment, which is the say of the public opinion or the people at large, is manipulable, but interests are not. And that is why states depend more on their interests than what the sentiment is. Because the sentiment is manipulable, while the interests are not. And that is a very essential differentiation when we look at relations between nations. Not only Pak-US, of course, but all the relations. The next point that I wish to make is that whether it is the political association or a relationship, and for that matter economic, which leads to security sustenance, that means security comes after the political relationship has been established and economic alliances there, and therefore that it leads to a security dimension to that relationship, or is it the security to begin with, the need for a security from a certain country, from a certain source, and then that develops into political and economic relationship. It's a very essential differentiation when we talk of the United States and China, because you can actually place one in each of these categories. One belongs to the political and economic, leading to security, the other perhaps is security, then moving on to political and economic. Which one of these is better, I leave it to you, but that is a differentiation that must also come into play. I was asked to cover some history, but I'm not going to do that because a lot of time, paucity of time, in fact, we've used a lot of time already. But 1954 was the first time, 1954 was the first time that a massive influx of American technology came into the Pakistani military. This was in the form of the military assistance program in 1954. Keep in mind, it didn't just begin in 1954. Soon after inception of Pakistan, the Qaeda-Azam wrote to various countries, and one of the first countries that he wrote to was the United States of America, hoping that the relation between us and them could be based on idealism, which he actually lauded in terms of the American idealism of the founding fathers and how a democracy had taken place or taken shape there. So he very much hoped that Pakistan and the US, and there are other historical reasons that I won't get into those for the moment. So 1954 was a time when we first saw a huge amount of influx. And because it's an Air Force audience mostly, as I can see from here, and if you're not, then please bear with me. We know the F-86s came in a big way, and then from 54 to 65, and then of course the Starfighter 104 was a part of it, 1960 sometime. But 65 war came soon after, and we all laud and applaud our performance in 1965 war. Keep in mind that these F-86s and the military assistance program came along with free fuel and free spares for as long as possible. And what our pilots did, and Marshal sits here, and I'm sure he belongs to that generation. I also flew the F-86, but not in that period. That our pilots got to fly as much as they could, and therefore mastered handling of that particular platform, the aerial platform. And when the 65 war came, you found that the smaller Air Force held its own. And when that was the reason, because of the fact of the combat readiness, the operational preparedness, and the fact that they had reached that level of competence as far as the capability was concerned. But along with, we went back to the Americans 30 years later. The 54 was the first time, the second influx was 1983. And this is when the F-16s found their way into Pakistan. So this was the second influx, and this was again the state of the art as far as the world was concerned at that time, at that point of time. Pakistan soon became a recipient of the topmost technology, the top tier technology in the world. We had already been to the Chinese in 1966, 65, 66, after the war, and bought in the F-6s and other airplanes with the Chinese technology and based on original technology. But this is when we received the F-16 and the Cobras. And remember, soon after, we went into in fact, around 2000, and I'll come to that later, we went into a war, a 40-year-long war. 79 it began, and I think the Pakistan military and the Pakistani Air Force got involved with it, more importantly in the last 20 years of it when the Americans were here. And we found the impact that these technologies had on the results of the battlefield. These were the technologies of the Cobra in the Army aviation and the F-16 as it was utilized during this 20-year-long war in which Pakistan fought its portion of war against terror along its own territories. And therefore, that impact and that technology was also put to use in a great benefit to us. We had the 71 war in between, and that is the time that we did not have any relationship with the Americans. It had been broken off. We had a relationship, political relationship, but nothing new since 1954. And then we had the 1999 Kargil situation. Then it was a skirmish. It was a kind of an episode which did not lead to very major war. It did not result in a major war between us. 2002, we had a 10-month-long standoff with the Indians, and somehow again it did not develop into a major conflict or any kind of conflict. 2008, Mumbai, and then again Pakistan was in the spotlight, did not develop into this thing. 2019, just 2.5 years back, was a skirmish, and Pakistan was able to acquit itself very well. If you look at these dates and these years, and you look at the technology that our military had, especially now talking more about the Pakistan Air Force, you will find that there is a sense of a technological edge whenever we got into skirmish with the adversary. And that technological edge has helped you well in terms of making up the numbers on the other side and balancing out the numbers. This renders our relationship with the US critical to Pakistan's short-term and medium-term interests. I'm not talking about long-term, but short- and medium-term interests. Let me now move on to the process of doctrinal evolution and its perennial linkage with technology. It's important to understand that technology and doctrine come hand in hand with each other. Unless you have the technology, doctrine serves no purpose. And without technology, your doctrine is of a low standard. Okay, and 1999 Kargil was a unique event that was illustrative of strategic restraint as well as operational calibration. We did not go out for full war. Neither did India go out onto full war in the case of Kargil. But the process it generated in terms of political and operational decision-making remains instructive. We chose to exercise strategic and operational restraint, influenced by strategic equilibrium, and so did India. There was a case of an equilibrium in the region, and that may have also helped. There were also reasons of conventional force equilibrium, in effect, that kept India at bay, not knowing the kind of quality that the Pakistani Air Force did, and there was a very clear caution on the Indian side as well as to not extend their operations into the Pakistani territory. We obviously also did not look for the enhancement or the expansion of the conflict, and there were the reasons for that. From a strategic perspective, essentially, and from a military standpoint, if India did not pursue war in 1999 and 2002, two factors stand out: nuclear deterrence and a technology-driven composite force equivalence, in effect, of which the F-16 remained a major factor. It was an unknown quantity and could not be technological, and could be the technological surprise that India would have factored into its decision-making. One of the possibilities. She wisely chose to resist. Then, of course, I mentioned the role of the gunship, etc., and the F-16 in the 2004 onwards operations and our own war on terror, and that is also something that we need to carry with us as we move on to see how to conceive our relationship with the United States in the future. Okay, back in the early 2000s, we knew we needed addition to our high technology, or high tech as we call them in the Air Force platforms, and a certain weapons capability which would cover the gap. These gaps were known to us. We knew what we were lacking in our capability. This was early 2000, and so therefore we ended up engaging the Americans again. And by 2005, we had defined the package of the new F-16 buy, which is the Block 52, for the next infusion of technology into our needs. Remember, when we did that, we had a doctrine of employment, a doctrine of engagement, but we did not have the means. But as we did this particular contract with the US, it obviously gave us that muscle to be able to put that doctrine into effect, the result of which obviously became visible a couple of years back. As I say this, and I don't know how much of time is left, but let me quickly read through this. What, a couple of minutes?
Your brevity and crispness is legendary, I trust that.
Okay, all right. I really don't get what you're saying, but anyway, I'll finish it off right. One limitation that will always remain, keep countries like us dependent, countries like Pakistan, is that sourcing the defense equipment is, of course, always a difficulty. Where to get it from? And that will be determined by what is the state of relationship with the government intended for sourcing a capability. It needs a longer than instantaneous relationship, because supportability and currency of equipment are also as critical. This is one of the factors we need to keep in mind. If a government is willing to sell a technology to us, that is willing to sell a technology to us, do we have the money to buy it? That's the second aspect. Or what shall be the mechanism of funding in case of an intended deal? And thirdly, if an owner nation is even willing to release the technology to us, whether this really means is that if they have the technology, are they willing to release it to us? Many a time it happens that you have the money, you want to buy technology, but the source nation does not want to release it to you, which is very frequently the case across the source nation, whether you look at China or US or France or anywhere else. Pakistan's overall sense of direction in a relationship with the country, say the US or China or Russia or Turkey, will determine as to how and from where we can source our military equipment. When looked at from a Pakistan-US perspective, these remain very laden conditions or factors. The US-Pak relations are rarely smooth, they are mostly up and down. The US is a rare funds donor, and especially in sale of military equipment, does not give about freebies at all. The US has always timed provision of critical military technology with their own critical national interest. When it is their need, they will perhaps make anything and everything available to you, as has been the case till now, till 1983 and 2005, 2006. 2004 and 5 was one such moment when we needed addition of new technology and numbers, and through it all add to our technological and lethality advantage. US, of course, needed us at that time, and therefore was ready to give it to us. We should boil this down to the following conclusions. Pakistan and the US have had a long, deep, and sometimes intensely cold and warm relationship. If the US was driven by its strategic interests, Pakistan too was strategically directed to keep a large and perpetual adversary at bay and off his back. It works both ways. It was never that any country can force its interests upon you. You have also an interest or a part of meat there or flesh there to do your own bidding. Pakistan remains a technology-dependent nation, and it goes without saying that the US is the world's technology leader, without a doubt. That is proven by its academic resource, research tradition, and innovation and entrepreneurship, which helps it create more. Nations like us will depend on secondary technology or hand-downs when we cannot access the top-tier technology. This is other than many economic and financial related factors which, of course, Dr. Chohan so ably commented upon. Pakistan must at all times depend on a force mix which will compose of the high-tech and the medium technology platforms. There are few sources in the world which enable such significant addition from a single procurement. That means you take one procurement, it makes such quantum leap into your capability. The doctrinal similarities between the concept of employment between the US and Pakistan militaries, Pakistani militaries, make technology infusion and assimilation pattern easier. Technology has been, is, and will be our biggest force equalizer against any comparison in the region. Even as technology changes and increasingly assists decision making, our dependence will remain on finite destruction vis-a-vis transitory suspension of adversary's capability. I think it's a very important factor to keep in mind that we are looking for finite destruction of an adversary's capability, not only transitory suspension. So all this cyber thing, etc., means it's good, but along with that will also come the need for hardware and finite capability to eliminate those capabilities when required and needed. I quickly will talk about the balancing act needed and the China factor. China remains our cornerstone in our foreign policy as well as our political and economic needs, as well as military needs, without a doubt also. We are lucky to have such a deep relationship with China and celebrate her success in economic and technological terms. We are also lucky that most, if not all, technology from China is released to us and at relatively cheaper rates. It may not be the top tier and maybe hands down, but adds potency to our capability. We have never had the low to medium tech component in our Air Force mix, in our force mix, as potent and effective as it is today. And this holds true for all services across the board. It has given us a great fillip in our total military strength. So what will it take to keep the balance right between the US and China? Don't close the windows and doors of your house. Let fresh air in. Cross ventilation is key to a healthy house. Don't push yourself to take sides as a political or a military establishment. No one is asking you to take sides. Don't devise blocks when none has the gumption for it, and choose sides when neither the environment exists for it, nor anyone is asking for you to choose sides. Remember, these are times of competition as well as complementarities in the global scene of how the world looks at this time. Please don't celebrate others' victories and someone else's loss. This amounts to geopolitical suicide. And we may not be exactly right in how we assess a certain development, geopolitical development. Lessons, yes, but just something unnecessary. We should have learned something from the Soviet Union's example of vacated Afghanistan. We have only now barely begun to get things straightened between us, that is us and Russia, because of how we reacted post-Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. Our relationship with the US must continue to be as normal as possible. It doesn't have to be measured in zero-sum terms, or how cozy and far we are from the lap of the United States. And why sit in anyone's lap? This shall be the first step to a mutually respectable relationship if we stop looking at sitting in someone's lap. With the depth and expanse of our relationship with the US, even a routine interaction is enough to sustain the goodwill. She should be treated as an equal opportunity supplier and investor if she wants to. More than being a test of our diplomacy, it is a test of our national character and disposition as a nation. Are we fickle or mature and reliable, or given to misplaced exuberance? Geopolitics is not populism, but based on hard facts and interests. To end, here is a quote from Henry Kissinger. He says, probably this is right, I see it so frequently, so therefore I thought to bring it to you. To be an enemy of America can be dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. And Henry Kissinger may have said that, I'm not sure, but it's quite possible. When you get senile, you can say a lot of things, even here in America. So enjoy the time away from America and build your inner strength, because soon America will be again at your door as a bosom buddy, and you will be unable to say no to him. Such is the nature of this relationship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marshal Shahzad Chaudhry, for a very profound assessment of a very difficult topic, security. And I cannot help but reiterate a very profound sentence that cross-ventilation is very healthy for a house. I think in terms of changing winds of world order, that's a very thought-provoking statement. And also that how we chart our course and build, maintain, and deepen our relationship with great powers who have diverse instruments of exploitation and coercion is a great test of our national character. We built and used our air power with the help of the Americans because they provided us the hardware, the technology, and also the free fuels that we mentioned. That may not be as forthcoming in future as possible. So we have to convert these challenging times into opportunities. And that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to a moment in this seminar, where we have comprehensively analyzed the 4 key domains or dimensions of the Pak-US relationship: geopolitical, socio-cultural, economic, and security. So what does this mean for future? What options do we have? I think you'll agree that we cannot find a more knowledgeable and experienced diplomat than Ambassador Jilani to help us explore some of the options, how to chart our course in this difficult relationship and convert these challenges into opportunities. Let me briefly introduce him for the benefit of those who are not aware of his very illustrious credentials. Ambassador Jilani is Director of Foreign Policy at CAS and offers 38 years of illustrious diplomatic experience based on bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. He served as Pakistan's Foreign Secretary and also as an ambassador to the United States, Belgium, Luxembourg, European Union, Australia. So without any further ado, let's listen to Ambassador Jilani.
Thank you so much, Muhammad Ali Sahab, for the introduction. It's a great honor to be speaking to a distinguished group of guests and also sharing a panel with some of the most illustrious colleagues, senior colleagues and friends. Foreign Minister Inam-ul-Haq Sahab, Senator Javed, Jabbar Sahab, Vice Marshal Chaudhry Sahab, and Dr. Usman. I consider myself extremely lucky and fortunate that when I joined the Foreign Service of Pakistan way back in 1980, Foreign Minister Inam-ul-Haq Sahab was my first boss. And I owe a debt of gratitude to him for his guidance, his coaching, and the training which subsequently Inam Sahab has comprehensively covered the geostrategic environment and the challenges that Pakistan has to face on account of US-China rivalry, Indo-Pacific strategy, US-India partnership, strategic partnership, Quad, and Afghanistan and many other challenges. I would simply add that in order to understand the dynamics of Pakistan-US relations, we have to keep the following factors in mind. One, we don't have strategic convergences with the United States of America. As a matter of fact, we never had strategic convergences with the US. During the Cold War, we decided to align our interests with the, our respective interests in order to promote our respective objectives. Secondly, even though we were part of the US-led alliance, our interests largely differed. There were no truly common or shared strategic interests which is necessary to form a genuine alliance. Thirdly, although our interests differed, they were important and provided the basis of cooperation during the Cold War. And to some degree, even today, Pakistan has always been preoccupied with its security vis-a-vis India, while US interests focused on Soviet Union and more recently on China, Afghanistan, terrorism, and building of relationship with India. Fourthly, both US and Pakistan benefited from this relationship. Pakistan, during the initial phase, after independence, received critical defense equipment which fortified our defenses against India. We also received, and I'm talking about the initial years, we also received some support on the Kashmir dispute as well. And got economic assistance as well. We were also able to build large dams with US assistance. And I'm referring to the Bela Dam, Mangla Dam. Members of our armed forces, our senior civil servants, students, they also got training in the United States of America. And then the US also built some educational institutions and also helped develop the newly developed capital, Islamabad. US also benefited from this relationship in the shape of our joining CENTO, as well as Pakistan becoming the frontline state against Soviet Union, and then subsequently as a frontline state against extremism and terrorism. And the nature of this relationship has transformed over the years. We are now at a stage when we are caught in the crossfire of US-China strategic rivalry. We remain fearful that the balance that we have been able to maintain in this relationship for a very long time between our relations with the United States of America and China, it may not remain as comfortable a situation for us because of the developments which are taking place on the global landscape. There is always a fear that we may be confronted with the choice of either with us or against us, and we only hope that we do not really come to that stage and continue to maintain this neutrality that we have maintained for a significant part of our existence. This certainly poses a challenge as we have to cope with the negative impact of growing US-India partnership and the looming crisis of potential civil conflict in Afghanistan following the US withdrawal. For the last several years, policymakers in the US have started to look at US-Pakistan relations through the lens of India, China, Indo-Pacific strategy, Afghanistan, or counterterrorism. The Indian factor, the Chinese factor, and our divergences on Afghanistan have also given rise to the growth of a large number of lobbies in the United States of America. And if you ask me, having served in Washington for almost 4 years, as to what was the main challenges that you confronted in the United States of America in the discharge of your responsibilities, and I would say that these lobbies which have emerged in the last almost 2 decades or so, since mid-90s, because of the US focus on India, because of the US focus on China, that perhaps poses the most formidable challenge for Pakistan's diplomacy. You have pro-India lobbies in the United States of America which exist in almost every sphere of life. You have very strong pro-India lobbies in the US administration, in the American Congress, in the think tank community, in the media, and these are also lobbies because they are pro-India lobbies. They have, by its very nature, they have also become anti-Pakistan lobbies. And then you have the emergence of anti-China lobbies. The kind of hype that has been generated in the United States of America in terms of its relationship with China in the last over 1.5 decades, it also has given rise to the growth of this anti-China lobby. And this lobby is again anti-Pakistan lobby. We have an Afghan lobby, we have the Jewish lobby, which also looks at Pakistan through a certain lens. On the other hand, we see the same Jewish lobby working very, very closely with the Indian lobby in the United States of America because of the convergence of interests that have developed between India and Israel. And then, of course, we also have the non-proliferation lobby, which continues to work against Pakistan and continues to pollute the minds of the American policymakers on a regular basis. The leaks which normally take place in the US media related to various aspects of our nuclear program, or for that matter, the other important aspects, they are also motivated and with a certain objective in mind. And then we have the opportunist lobbies, and this is the lobby, this category, which is our own people who benefited from being Pakistanis initially, and then subsequently when they decided to settle down in the US, they are also trying to harm Pakistan's interests in order to please the other lobbies that I was referring to you about. When I talk about this US tilt towards India, I'm reminded of a very important event. I was in Washington when Prime Minister Modi, he visited Washington and he addressed the joint session of the American Congress. And the first sentence that he uttered in that joint session was that I have come to thank the American policymakers and members of the Congress for the denial of military equipment to Pakistan, which we had lobbied extensively that Pakistan should not be given. So, that's the kind of, so that gives an impression as if the nature of US-India relations has developed to an extent as if India exercises almost a veto over any initiative that the United States of America takes in respect of Pakistan. Foreign Minister Inam-ul-Haq Sahab has referred to various policy papers and statements by American senior people. But then recently there is a declassified report termed as the US Strategic Framework for Indo-Pacific. This is a report that part of it was leaked out in the media, and the US administration was compelled to make it public. Otherwise it was supposed to be released in 2023. So this is a very interesting document because it describes India as a strategic partner which would be able to contain China, and it describes China as a strategic rival, and then it gives the detail about the kind of things the US intends to do in respect of China in order to contain China, and then it also gives details of the kind of cooperative relationship the US would like to establish with India. So given this kind of an environment, where do we go from here? I think, first of all, we need to have realistic expectations from the United States of America. We can't look at this relationship if our expectation from the United States of America is not to look at this relationship through the lens of India. We should also not look at this relationship between Pakistan and the United States of America through the lens of India. India certainly is in a totally different league altogether as far as the US is concerned. As I mentioned earlier, that Pakistan does not have strategic convergences with the United States of America. On the other hand, India has very strong strategic convergences with the United States of America. Maybe it is, whether it's relationship with China, whether it's Indo-Pacific strategy, or whether it's about situation in Afghanistan, or for that matter, matters related to South Asia. As was rightly pointed out by Foreign Minister Inam-ul-Haq, that Wendy Sherman in her statement mentioned that the conversation that she had in Pakistan would be reported to India. So that's the kind of a relationship that they have established. Secondly, I think we also need to review our relationship. This may sound to be a little provocative, but I have been sort of advocating this, having served in Washington twice, that we need to review our policy vis-a-vis Israel as well. Now that for the last several years, it's not an Abraham Accord, maybe it was signed only last year, but the contours of the cooperation between Middle Eastern countries and Israel began to emerge several years ago. And many of the Middle Eastern countries, even if they did not have any formal relationship with Israel, they did have strong informal relationship with Israel. And Israel has also been extremely helpful in softening the negative perceptions of members of the US Congress towards some of these Middle Eastern countries as well. And some of the bills, because our relationship was confined to security and intelligence cooperation for a long time after independence. And by the way, this security and intelligence cooperation by its very nature falls in the realm of secret with India from 2004 to 2008 here in Pakistan. We were able to improve the trade volume between our two countries from a paltry $300 million to almost $3 billion in a span of 3 to 4 years. So this interaction between the business communities is extremely important. Our corporate sector can certainly play a very important role in promoting and creating the stakes of the American corporate sector in Pakistan. One important reason we have been unable to forge a broad-based relationship was the weak economic base and poor governance, which made Pakistan dependent either on the US or other countries for economic assistance. This kind of an assistance also undermined our own interests, because when we subordinate ourselves to the interests of others by asking for their financial assistance, obviously the kind of autonomy that we would like to have, that also gets compromised. So this is something which is again something extremely important for us to pursue. And then having identified these challenges, I still maintain that we still have space and we can enter into a cooperative relationship with the United States of America. Again, for that, there are, again, Javed, Jabbar sahab, Inam-ul-Haq sahab, and Shahzad Chaudhry sahab, and Dr. Usman mentioned that we also need to put our own house in order. Pakistan has a very negative image outside Pakistan. And how do we sort of improve that image? the kind of agreement that took place between the one hand organization and the government of Pakistan only last week, the kind of media projection it received outside Pakistan, it was extremely disturbing for all of us. I think this is something that creates a lot of pessimism with regard to the future of our country. It also retards our economic progress to a larger extent. I think in terms of our convergences, I think we still have space to develop convergences on Afghanistan. Pakistan's cooperation in Afghanistan is something which is needed by the United States of America in countering extremism and terrorism, and we can certainly find areas of convergences both in the context of Afghanistan and counterterrorism. One important factor that I noticed that we had not focused much in the past, but it is currently being addressed, is the role of diaspora. The diaspora plays a very important role in building a strong relationship between the two countries. When we identify the reasons why the US and India has developed a strong partnership, apart from geostrategic factors, the role that has been played by the Indian-American community has also been very critical. They are now parcel of the, they not only influence policy, but they are part of the policy making mechanism in the United States of America. I'm glad to report that in recent years, some of our younger members of the Pakistani American community, they have started to take part in the political scene in Washington, in the US. They are joining government services. There are many in the State Department. There are many in the White House, in the Department of Defense and other organizations, which is a very positive development. But at the same time, I think we need to bring them under one platform. We should discourage them from the kind of politics that is being pursued in Pakistan, in the country of birth. They should remain apolitical for as long as they are in the US. Lastly, I would say that Pakistan will continue to face the pressure in the context of China, CPEC, Indo-Pacific strategy in relation with India and counter-terrorism. And in case we are able to build ourselves economically, if we are economically strong, if we are able to overcome the kind of challenges related to extremism and terrorism, we should be able to resist such pressure. One major reason for the downturn in our relations has been the negative narrative. I think negative narrative is also something that needs to be addressed. There is a strong anti-American sentiment that has developed in Pakistan, which is also the kind of responsible for the downturn in this relationship, and the same kind of a situation we witness on the American side, where various lobbies, they also create a negative narrative. But I think it is the responsibility of the leadership in both the countries to develop a better relationship, a better narrative about each other. At the end, I would say that in the last 72 years, Pakistan was subjected to a lot of pressure. Pakistan, in the face of such pressure, was able to make some hard choices. We never compromised on something which impinged on our national interest, whether they related to the Kashmir dispute, Kashmir issue, our nuclear program, Afghanistan, some of the issues related to the Middle East, and we were able to, in the future, we also present some hard choices for Pakistan and it will be important to make the decisions based on a careful assessment of the short, medium, and long-term implications of such policies. Prudence would demand that Pakistan and the US continue to seek cooperative relationship. Pakistan can be a useful economic partner. There is enormous potential for enhanced Pakistan-US economic cooperation under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or for that matter, bilateral cooperation. One positive development is that in the US Congress, the bill for the revival of reconstruction opportunity zones, that has been revived, and in case we lobby extensively, we would be able to, that the bill certainly can enjoy enough support in the US Congress. This is a zone which, according to the proposal, has to be established along Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and it would create a lot of good economic opportunities, not only for Pakistan and Afghanistan, but also for the countries of the region, and for that matter, the United States of America. US will need Pakistan to stabilize Afghanistan, to eliminate terrorism from our region, to reduce tension with Iran, develop convergences on nuclear issues, and for peace and stability in South Asia. We have our relationship with the United States of America is as good as our relationship with China. We have never played one against the other, and as a matter of fact, we have played the role of a bridge between the two countries, and we would continue to play the same role in our belief that a cooperative relationship between two power centers, the United States of America and China, is something which is in the larger interest of peace and stability in the world. Thank you so much.
Three key lessons that I've learned. He has warned that economically building ourselves and addressing the extremism and terrorism related threats will help us deal better with these daunting challenges and pressures which we are expecting due to the global and regional challenges that are faced by our nation. But there is a ray of hope, particularly optimism shown in the context of the growing knowledge, wealth and influence of our diaspora within the US, and also the growing understanding that perhaps instead of looking for financial bailouts, we need to optimally and efficiently exploit the export potential in the US market and continue to maintain a stable relationship even in the security realm in terms of Afghanistan and counter-terrorism. So, ladies and gentlemen, since you've been patiently listening to these very comprehensive and insightful expose of different complex aspects of Pak-US relationship, we've overshot time, so we'll have a brief question and answer session so that we can also benefit from your contribution. But I'll request that due to the paucity of time, kindly restrict yourself to only questions rather than comments, and I'll appreciate if you are brief and kindly address a specific panelist to whom you want to address your questions, and can I have, and also identify yourself.
Sir, I'm A.M. Nasir. What I've gathered from the seminar is that in Pak-US relations, we know what are the challenges and we know what are the remedial actions. Then what stops us in taking those remedial actions? For instance, if you know that most of the policies, US policies, especially towards Pakistan, are influenced by India, and they have gathered that clout by virtue of their 20 years of hard work through lobbies, diaspora, etc. What stops us doing that? What are the challenges that we are facing in reaching to that level, that hard work that India has done? Why can't we do it? My question is to any of the Jilani sir.
Thank you so much. I think we can't really reach that level because of a number of factors. One is the geostrategic environment. When at the administration's level, things begin to change in favor of a particular country, there is automatically these lobbies that are referring to me also emerge. Since mid-90s, every successive US administration has termed India-US relations as one of the most important relations. And then it also talks about, every administration has spoken about the desirability of building a strong partnership with India as the formidable foreign policy objective of the United States of America. So that is one factor. The second factor is obviously the China factor that I mentioned in my talk. The emergence of US administration since President Obama, ever since the announcement of Indo-Pacific strategy, which was earlier named as Asia-Pacific strategy, and then subsequently by the Trump administration and the now the Biden administration, they have taken this competition and rivalry to a new level. Our strong relationship with China, our strong strategic relationship, to be very honest, they are also seen as a kind of a challenge by many of the stakeholders in the United States. So obviously we can't, but what we can do is to basically, as the role of media is very important, the role of corporate sector is very important, the role of Javed, Jabbar sahab very rightly pointed out that many of the Pakistani chairs in some of the American universities, they are lying vacant. The fault lies with us. We were unable to fill those slots with able academics. And secondly, I think we also were unable to gain the space that India has gained in the American media as well as American think tanks community. So these are some, and then also the role of Indian-American community in building a strong network in politics is also something which has contributed to this important area.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman in the front.
Sir, Air Marshal Najib. All the speakers have referred to we have to put our house in order.
Sir, he wants to respect. Can you just wait for a minute and allow the keynote speaker to also address this question?
Perceptions matter more than the truth in many ways. We have developed a negative perception of the United States over the years. First, because of our nuclear program, then the accusation of nuclear proliferation against us, issues of terrorism, and issues of stabbing the United States in the back, which have been repeated ad nauseum in the US Congress, in the US administration, in various US departments, including the DOE. In order to fight those perceptions, we had to establish Pakistan as a responsible state. We are seen as an irresponsible nuclear state in many quarters. And this started particularly after 1999 Kabul. That was the watershed where India started to make space between Pakistan and India in the eyes of the Americans. We both had carried out nuclear explosions, but Kabul was presented as an irresponsible act by a nuclear Pakistan which could have led to a nuclear disaster. So we have to first of all break out of those perceptions. Secondly, there is a limitation of resources. We do not have enough people to represent us in the West, particularly in the United States. If you look at the think tanks in the US, they're full of Indian scholars. How many scholars have we sent abroad? Are we interested in sending scholars abroad? Who are the representatives that we send abroad? We say Kashmir is the jugular of Pakistan. Who is representing Kashmir these days? The Minister for Kashmir Affairs is a gentleman who doesn't know much about Kashmir. The chairman of the Kashmir Committee is a gentleman who doesn't know much about Kashmir. What do they do when they go abroad? Can they really effectively portray the case of Pakistan when they are talking to their interlocutors in these countries? And most of the time they are not talking to the interlocutors. They are talking to the Pakistani community in those countries. There are a number of limitations that we have. The internal problems of the country, the image of the country reflects the kind of influence that it can have. The economic power of the country reflects the influence it can have abroad. If you are seen to be in every country, whether it is the Middle East, whether it is a Western nation, moving with a begging bowl every 6 months, asking for a few $100 million, then how do you expect countries to respect you as a nation? That is why the emphasis was set your house in order before you go abroad to convince others that you are a nation which is worth looking up to. So we have to look inwards before we look outwards. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman in front.
Time for question.
Sir, please. Can you identify yourself?
Every speaker has said that we have to put our house in order, but nobody has defined what that order is. Is it constitutional democracy? Do we need one head of state or many heads of states within the states? Who is to make policy? How are we to run it? And what is the order that you propose? Jabbar sahab, Inam sahab, kindly, you are receiving also. I have a question.
Thank you very much for that provocative question. Almost as provocative as the shelling by the Indians across the Yellow Sea. You pose a very unfair question, a very important one, but it is unfair. Because when we say put our house in order, it does not necessarily mean that we also present a prescription for what should be done. Simply by correcting what is so grossly wrong in the existing system. People don't inventing or changing the system, which is a formidable challenge. If we just improve what we already have, that is what at least I humbly think of putting our house in order. And that has a cross-cutting, comprehensive application, the structures of governance, the performance of the civil service, the example set by the political leadership, the partisanship of party-based democracy, which is really the poison of democracy, but that's a conundrum, it's an oxymoron. Can you have consensus in a democracy? Or we always condemn to schism and conflict in the name of the Westminster parliamentary model that we've inherited and we're blindly imitating, which requires serious reform, where we need to make democracy participative, empowering people, where 50% of the people don't vote, and people who get 15% of the vote, maximum 20%, get to represent 100%, 50% who never voted, and even those who voted against them, they get to represent. Right? One of the most absurd electoral aspects, and we've adopted it because India has it, because Britain has it. I mean, I believe fervently in making voting compulsory. making it participatory. Let citizens take responsibility. Instead of just pointing fingers at leaders, make 51% vote compulsory for the winner. Have second round voting, that's just in the political domain. So setting a house in order, first of all, must make democracy representative of reality. Our democracy is an electoral democracy. It is not a representative democracy. So putting our house in order is a formidable task, but it can be done. We have the will. In some instances, the public sector, which is notoriously responsible for these huge albatrosses called the public sector enterprises, circular debt. That very public sector in this country can produce, if the will and leadership is there, we can produce the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, we can produce NADRA, we can produce the State Bank of Pakistan, we can do one of the most effective campaigns against COVID-19, fantastic. Something that has excelled and it has not been able to meet the great resources of the United States and Europe. They have collapsed and we have succeeded. My God! We created nuclear weapons, the most un-Islamic weapon, and we did it because we had to survive. We did it. So we do have the capacity, but we need to elect the right people, then we need to govern correctly. So there's a whole set of things, and I would urge the Center for Aerospace Studies and Security to convene another meeting on this and to allow me only 2 hours so that I can put you to sleep and give you the solution.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I appreciate a brief answer so that we can have one more round. Thank you.
I will only give you one prescription: control your population. Nobody talks about it on the TV, in the media, anywhere. In another 20 years, we will have 400 million people to feed, with much less water per capita, and with much less arable land to produce food, and with much more desertification because of climate change. Just one factor can destroy the country, and we are paying zero attention to it. Let's not talk of proportional representation. Maybe proportional representation is the best solution to our system. We should also abide by the Constitution. The powers should rest with the civilian government. The civilian government should make policy, and it should be in charge of implementing the policy also. Let's be quite clear about that. There are no two ways to describe it, how to share power and how many heads of state there should be. There can be only one center of power, that is the people of Pakistan, and the political parties that vote to them get their votes. So let's not talk politics, let's talk social issues, governance, population, education, health. What are we doing right? Do only one thing right, everything will settle down. If you can control your population, you can improve your education system, you can improve your health system, you can provide more shelter to your people. But the Maulvi will not let you talk about population growth. They want to increase the population of the Ummah as quickly as possible and as much as possible and wherever possible. So control the data. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman in the third row with the beard, please. Can you introduce yourself?
Assalamualaikum. I am Chef Model retired Javed. What I can see from the participants and questions, that future of Pak-US relationship, I don't see that something good is going to come, because at this moment we are at the worst relationship with the US. Even the President Biden not even like to talk to our Prime Minister. So is it not the time we should look at another angle? Why don't we join the other bloc, the China and the Russia? Why to follow a thing which is almost impossible now, because American interest with the Indian lens is not going to have a proper view about Pakistan. It will be always biased.
Sir, if the distinguished panel allows, because we are running short of time, to take another question so that maybe we will answer them collectively. The gentleman in the third row.
My name is Khalid Tanuri, I am a retired Air Commodore. Such eminent panelists, I cannot resist not asking this question. The state of financial affairs being as it is, what can we do to get to a growth rate of 8% and sustain it for another 8 years? The question is to the whole panel. Thank you.
That was for easier question.
Sir, I think like diplomacy, answering briefly is also part of the possible.
There is a cost to every policy, sir. And all policies are made after an old logical analysis of the cost-benefit ratio. If you leave, for example, your relationship with the United States, in this world, you cannot remain isolated. And you cannot really, as Jalil said, try to be part of blocks. Our relationship is deep with both sides. So it will be very difficult to leave one side and go to the other side. Secondly, who will bear the cost of this relationship change? So we have to talk cold turkey to both sides. If we are going to make a choice between the two sides, we have to talk turkey to both sides, to the Western country, to the United States as well as to China. What do we get in return? We are used to giving away whatever leverage we have. We have never asked for anything in return. Why is that? Is that a weakness of our policy? Is that a weakness as individuals who are negotiating? We must be clear what the costs are and how they are going to be reimbursed. Your exports are all West-oriented. You export only $2 billion to China and about $24 billion to other sources. Where are you going to send your exports if you break away with the West? Your money is your IMF is your support. You have to go begging to them every 2 or 3 years to bail you out and give you another package. Because if you do not have an agreement with the IMF, the international financial institutions are not prepared to support you. So where is that money going to come from that you need every 6 months or every 1 year? Let's not be facile about it. We are facing a very difficult time. And if we make the wrong choice, the choice will be pain will be borne by the people of Pakistan. The rich have their money for perhaps and their children, the super rich abroad. We are the kind of people who have to live in this country, and we have to make sure that this is livable and not dependent on others. So let us first of all, as I suggested, try to form a group of like-minded nations which can talk to both sides and, as Jalil said, act as a bridge between both sides. If we can, maybe we do not have the capacity to do that, but if we can, try to make sure that they do not bring the world to an edge of disaster through their confrontation, and that we can establish a world through a multilateral forum like the United Nations, which is more equitable than it is today. If we fail to do that, but the effort must be made, and we must not think of joining one bloc or the other without clear and forethought as to what are going to be the costs. Secondly, sir, there is no way, no magic formula, no band that suddenly our economy will begin to grow by 8%. The world determines how your economy grows, and your businessmen and your manufacturers and your exporters develop how your economy will grow. Most of the time, we are interested in quick money. Nobody is prepared to invest money in long-term projects which will bring you benefit in the long term. We are traders, not manufacturers. We are not innovators. We are followers of innovation made by others. So you have to change your mindset before you can increase your rate of growth. And secondly, unless we have an educated mass of people, there is no way the economy will grow. Today, according to international figures, 37.6% of your children are malnourished. And as a result of that, they will grow up to be non-functional citizens. They will be a dead weight of your economy. You have to feed them so that their brains grow. If we can't do that basic thing, do we have any possibility of growing at 8%? Thank you.
Sir, a brief response from
Just want to add to the, I think it's been elaborately covered by Inam-ul-Haq, the issue of the block, joining one block or the other. There is a bit of news and information just in the last 2 days. The Chinese company Sinopec and an American company, Venture Global LNG, have signed the largest long-term LNG agreement between them, which is for the Chinese company to purchase 4 million tons of LNG per year from the American company. This for the next 20 years, which necessarily or by implication amounts to a no war pact for the next 20 years in many ways. Also the fact, don't forget, that regardless of the tariff wars, etc., that are going on, the two countries trade almost, and Dr. Usman can correct me on that, almost close to $1 trillion worth of trade between them. So when you have that kind of dependencies and interdependencies, then blocks are difficult to create. The news is that China and the US are setting up an economic bloc by themselves. So which one do we want to join? That's the question that we need to ask.
Sir, the gentleman in front.
Sir, I am a Marshal. Dr. Usman and Mr. Inam very persuasively mentioned that US will be relegated after 2030 to second position and China is going to be overtaking it by 2030. So first of all, historically we have never seen militarily number one part being relegated to number two economically. So will that be acceptable or will it fall into some sort of Thucydides trap?
Who would you like to address, sir? Sir, Dr. Usman?
Thank you, sir. At CAS, we've discussed this Thucydides trap extensively. It also speaks to what Sir Kanuri is saying about 8%, whether it's even possible. So, Taipei grew at 8% per year for 40 years. So it is possible. And the Thucydides trap asks, the first part said, okay, this power has taken them, and you've invested everything in this field. The second part of Thucydides' history is that you spent so much time fighting abroad that you didn't invest in your own people, and so you came back to coups and madness. And that is the most important part of Thucydides, I think, for the United States. So, as far as the recommendations for the 8% from the previous question, I think it's the investing in the quality of people that is the most important. So you should be invest in the quantity but not the quality. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Since we have really overshot time, last two questions. The gentleman.
I think we didn't answer the question of the Air Marshal about does a military power, primary military power, hand over power to a secondary military power. I think I'm sure you have read the book of Professor Brown Allison, Destined for War, in which he talks of the Thucydides trap. This was the Peloponnesian War which lasted 30 years between Sparta and Athens. Sparta was the established power, Athens was the rising power, and they fought for 30 years. In the end, Athens lost, which was a rising power, but Sparta was also destroyed tremendously. But the fact is, you are right, that military power is primarily in the United States is the major military power in the world today. The budget is almost $800 billion compared to the Chinese military budget of about $200 billion, or according to national estimates, $260 billion. So there is no comparison between the military powers of the two countries. But again, I think they are not going to go to war. Professor Ellison writes 16 examples in that book. Of those, 12 resulted in war, and in 4 cases, the situation was resolved through negotiations and without recourse to war. And let's hope, because situations have changed since those times, and if a war happens today, it will mean the end of planet Earth as we know it, that a war does not happen. And as has just been pointed out, the two countries are talking to each other. Their trade with each other exceeds $600 billion or more, and there has been talk of a chimera, or two countries, sort of two-headed hydra which will control the economy of the world. It is possible to imagine that China and the United States will jointly come together to control the rest of the world. But that again will be in a way not a very good solution for the world, in the sense that it's too large. And I suspect that the United States also realizes that if the conflict expands to a nuclear exchange, the destruction will be so vast and the nuclear window will be so long that human life may not exist anymore after that. So let's hope that it doesn't come to that.
Thank you. Just last 2 questions. That lady in the back and the gentleman here. And I'll apologize to all the others who I could not entertain, but I think after the concluding address by the chair, I think you will have a well-deserved dinner over which you can interact with the illustrious panel.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Sir Muhammad Adil. My name is Rabia, and I'm a student of Strategic Studies, Air University. And my question is, respected Javed Jabbar, that what practical steps Pakistan can take to survive the new Cold War? Thank you.
Can I take this? Sir, can I take a second one as well? Please, the last question, gentleman there.
I am from Lolai, Pakistan. My question is also from Inam.
Is your mic on?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The US-China strategic competition is emerging in the region. Afghanistan has also fallen in the hands of our beloveds, the Taliban. ISKP re-emergence may further worsen the security situation. It is also possible that US-China sensitivities may create an atmosphere of Cold War era. Pakistan and KPK are more vulnerable in this regard. What are the options available with Pakistan to deal with the situation? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Javed, sir.
Thank you. How do we approach our policies in this second Cold War? First of all, by making sure we do not become part of that Cold War. We simply cannot afford to be part of any protagonistic posture.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is very challenging to conclude a seminar being addressed by such an illustrious panel. So I'll try and be as brief as possible and staying away from what already has been taught, but some repetition is essential. history of Pakistan-US relations describes those to be at best oscillatory in nature, varying from the most favored nation to the most sanctioned ally. Despite Pakistan engaging in unprecedented cooperation to promote Washington's geopolitical and geostrategic interests. However, this cooperation often has been extended at a significant cost to our own economic progress, internal security and geo-economic potential. In the geopolitical realm, US cooperation helped Pakistan equip military forces, build national infrastructure and train manpower. However, our commitment towards SEATO, CENTO and Baghdad Pact did not adequately help us in defending ourselves against a threat from India. In addition, the three eras of Pak-US security cooperation during 50s, 80s and the recent war on terror significantly affected our internal security, which slowed down our sustainable development, harmed investors' confidence, reduced substantive foreign direct investment, and made Pakistan miss its national development goals. Amply touched by all the speakers, is increasingly influencing US policies towards South Asia in general and Pakistan in particular, which is reflected in the explicit admission of the Indian External Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, that New Delhi has influenced the FATF process towards Pakistan. It is being viewed by our society as an instrument of coercion. In addition, unconditional and exceptional access of high technology weaponry and defense technologies to India is having a destabilizing effect in the region. An aggressive, conventional and strategic forward posture of major powers manifested by a formation of Quad and Abbas would not only reduce the mutual trust between global Asian powers, but would also raise the grave risks of misperception, accidents, unwanted escalation, which is in no one's interest. On our side, gentlemen and ladies, we as a nation must also reflect and do soul searching in terms of how we deal with major powers, including the United States. Pakistan needs to understand that the US political, legislative, diplomatic process, system and culture, which is complex, elaborate and is designed to serve US interests only. There was a need to deal with it at all three stages of pre-engagement, during negotiation and after that. We do not do that kind of a homework at depth. Pakistan's political bureaucratic dynamics, not being institutional and not slave to our national interess, constrains our ability to effectively negotiate at all these stages. We should not feel satisfied in developing individual relationships rather than institutional framework, which is usually short-lived. When we do that, we often lose our economic sovereignty. Did we ever weigh the effect of the gun that we gave it to a Mujahid in 1918? What will it do 40 years down to our culture? I doubt that we debated it at any institutional level So if we did not debate it at an institutional or think tank level before making a decision, how could the results be positive? Ladies and gentlemen, despite all that, the United States offers Pakistan its largest export and market, and is also the most influential partner in the multilateral financial institutions like IMF, World Bank, and FAT. In addition, Pakistani diaspora also provides the two countries deepening and mutually beneficial socio-economic bridge between the two nations. Thousands of dedicated and highly skilled Pakistani doctors, engineers, IT experts not only contribute to the progress of the US economy, but also send home valuable remittances on which their families depend. We need to actively engage US to convince her on the suitability of CPAC before we are late, because they desperately want to oppose it, and they are opposing it. Let's not give up. Engage them, try and get results. Diplomacy will give you results in a longer time frame, not in a shorter time frame. It is essential to slave all international negotiations and engagement commitments to our national interest, which unfortunately we may not have even defined as yet. There was a need of comprehensive diplomatic strategy to checkmate the growing Indian influence through engagement with political institutions like Congress, House Standing Committees, and other influential think tanks. Pakistan needs to engage positively despite all the challenges. And we hope that future of Pakistan-US relations is based on charting a course which respects the values and national interests and aspirations of both nations, facilitates the economic growth of this region, and recognizes the security compulsions of Pakistan as well. It is in long-term US interest that Pakistan is seen not only from the security, Indian or Afghan lenses, and is helped towards realizing its destiny to gradually emerge as a potentially stable, socially moderate, economically viable, and territorially secure nation, which contributes toward the peace, progress, and prosperity within South, Central, and Western Asia. A country so important cannot be easily ignored. This would allow us to view the region not as a zone of concern, but a land of opportunity. Lastly, I would like to extend my gratitude to all very learned speakers for sharing their valuable ideas and profound assessment on this very important subject. And to all the worthy participants and distinguished guests who spared their precious time to join us today in improving our collective understanding of the US-Pak relations. But lastly, I must thank the entire CAS team for their relentless effort for arranging this wonderful activity. I thank you all and sorry for the delays.
I would now like to request President Guest to kindly present the mementos to the distinguished panelists. would like to invite Ambassador Inam-ul-Haq to please receive your memento from President Gas. Lastly, I request Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani to please receive your memento.
Sir, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence here, and your session has been extremely insightful. What I would like to ask at this moment is how insightful do you think the entire event has been in encouraging the ideas, the expression of ideas on this important topic from people belonging to whole, diverse walks of life?
I think it was a very useful event and a very timely event because, as you know, the world is in turmoil. Different things are happening, different blocs are forming. The United States and China are competing with each other in all fields, in economic field, in technological field, diplomatic field, and even in military field. And Pakistan is not unaffected by these developments. So it is timely that we sit down and discuss what impact these developments can have on Pakistan. And there were very eminent speakers like Senator Javed, Jabbar, who has been minister 3 times, Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, and others who were contributing their thoughts about how Pakistan's policy should be formulated to meet the challenges that are emerging in the world.
Sir, what do you think about the role of CAS in organizing such an important event at such a critical time, especially when the region is at watershed moment?
Well, CAS is a think tank which is normally conducting seminars, etc., on events which are of importance to Pakistan. And this event was of a particular importance to Pakistan, so therefore I think that CAS did extremely useful work in collecting together a group of intellectuals to share their thoughts with each other.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
CAS organized this seminar on the future of Pakistan and US relations, opportunities and challenges, with the aim of not just reviewing the substance of the security, socio-cultural, economic and security dimensions of this bilateral relationship, but also to evaluate and critically analyze the process and the system within the US so that Pakistani leadership and stakeholders can deal with it much better in future, and also understand the implications of the emerging challenges and also identify new opportunities so that we can diversify and deepen this bilateral relationship.
Right. Thank you so much.
To just have a quick flashback and go to Soviet's withdrawal. Still, we are discussing Soviet withdrawal, its impact, its implications on the region, specifically Pakistan, and we are still discussing it. Then this was news of millions.
Such events. So first of all, how do you see the situation and the relationship between US and Thai evolving in coming weeks and months? And what are the challenges that the, not very cordial relations that are there right now? What are the challenges that Pakistan could face due to those?
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for.
I'd have to attach
you attach it here. Well, thank you very much for asking me the question. Since I'm one of the speakers on the panel today, so therefore I will perhaps be saying a lot more there than what I probably should say here. But in terms of your general question, well, the US is a very important global player. It's almost still a sole superpower. Yeah, but should I be talking to you?
I think it's better to look at the camera because we have to take
Acha. So So yes, so US is an important country in the world, and it still has its own influence and wields great amount of it in world affairs, economic, political, military. It has the largest and the strongest military in the world, and therefore the largest economy in the world. So therefore, when you look at it, the potential of that power is not going to wane away or fade away that quickly. And so therefore, Pakistan has to continue to retain a good, sensible relationship with the United States of America. We cannot neglect the United States of America for various reasons, our own limitations, our own compulsions, our own needs, and of course to be a responsible part of the world at large. So that's why it's important for us to understand these dynamics and therefore chart a way which is responsible as well as which goes along with the rest of the world. So that is what we should be looking at.
Right, sir. Thank you
so hopefully we should probably say and hear a lot more today from.
Sir, another question. What do you think about the role?
It's Pakistan Air Force is an important initiative. And so I think credit must be given to the Pakistan Air Force for establishing this. Secondly, of course, is the fact that it generates and involves a lot of public intellectuals from within Pakistan and abroad in terms of developing a better understanding of issues that are sometimes complex and sometimes need explanation. So I think CAS does a very good job of it, and well, by now they are a mature think tank of this country, so we're lucky to have one in the shape of CAS.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Look forward to listening to you.
Sure.
Pakistan and US relations evolving in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Pakistan's relationship with the United States of America, it's a very important relationship. It's a relationship which has seen many ups and downs in the last 72 years. There are a number of factors for the current downturn that we are witnessing. We need to realize that we don't have strategic convergences between Pakistan and the United States of America as of now. But at the same time, it is extremely important for both Pakistan and the United States of America to retain each other's goodwill for the protection and promotion of their respective interests. As I said, it's an important relationship. We have both benefited from this relationship when the relationship was very good. And I think the kind of efforts which are being made by our government, by the US administration, I have absolutely no doubt that the divergences which have developed in recent years, they will be overcome very soon.
Thank you, sir. Then another question, what do you think about the role of CAS when it comes to arranging events that promote such important discourse on such critical topics?
Well, Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, CAS, is certainly a very, very important think tank. It has emerged as a major think tank which has also emerged on the international circuit. CAS has developed relationship, linkages with a large number of international think tanks, and we discuss and produce papers for various institutions on security issues, on foreign policy issues, on strategic issues, on economic issues, and on social issues.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Sure. Sir, what do you think about the economic implications of stalled diplomatic US and Pakistan ties, and what do you think its implications are going to be in the future if the ties remain on the same trajectory in the foreseeable future?
Well, I think there's a big scope for Pakistan-United States relations to expand in the economic horizon.
Right.
In terms of exports, they're very important to us. In terms of foreign direct investment, not so much. In terms of remittances, kind of. So what you see is a mixed bag. And I think that we have to move on all fronts, strengthen both ways. They're important to us. We need to be important to them. And we need to set out a diverse portfolio between US, China, and all our other trading partners so we can mitigate risks for us and for them.
Right. Sir, another question. What do you think about the role of CAS when it comes to arranging events on such important, that promote such important discourse on critical topics, such as the one that we are discussing today, the future of Pakistan and US ties?
Well, I think CAS has a lot of excitement and a lot of motivation to speak to the public. That means that if it weren't the pandemic, we would have been extremely active, but our last major event of this kind was G-Star, which was a huge success. So CAS is very good at this. journalists, reaching out to the public. It's just the pandemic got in the way, but I feel a new groove, and I think that post-pandemic we'll be very proactive.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. We look forward to hearing your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. How do you see the relations of Pakistan and US evolving in the future, particularly when it comes to the current situation that we are not enjoying very cordial relations with the US and vice versa? How do you see the ties between the two countries evolving in the near future?
The nature of the two countries is very different. One is a global power located thousands of miles away from Pakistan, but it has a international global presence very close to Pakistan, and we have had a long historical relationship of 74 years. We have basic differences on some issues. However, we also have a similarity of views on other issues. We have cooperated closely in the past. We have differed strongly on occasions. I foresee a future of complexity and challenges of managing the relationship, of improving US perceptions about Pakistan and understanding about Pakistan. And similarly, we need to do much more to project our true identity and interests to key segments of American society. So it will remain a challenge, and we need to do much more.
Yes. Sir, another question. What do you think about the role of caste when it comes to arranging events that promote such important discourse on topics as important as today's, that is future of Pakistan-US ties?
Yes, the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies meets a very critical need, particularly from the Air Force's point of view. It is part of the three armed forces, yet it is, I think, attempting to take a larger view which goes beyond the armed forces and looks at the total picture. So CASS, with a team of researchers, which includes, I'm sure, yourself, is very promising, and in a short period of time it has established credibility.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When it comes to arranging such important events on such important topics timely, and how how important it is to initiate such sort of discourse in Pakistan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Actually,
sir, I could attach it here. I could do it.
Which is supposed to independently research subjects, particularly related to the national security, and build up opinion and put it up to the decision makers after a great research. So our solutions that we put up to our decision makers in military and civil and are well researched, well thought out, and they therefore are helpful for the decision makers. That's the role of CAS.
Thank you, sir. Sir, another question. What do you think about the topic that we're discussing today? How do you see the US-Pakistan ties evolving in the coming weeks and months?
The topic that we're discussing today is so important for us. What the topic is the challenges, opportunities, and way forward. We should always look at what has happened in the past, but not cry over it. Move forward and look for opportunities which are positive, even in the most difficult scenario. So we're going to today present the options for Pakistan in the present scenario that we have. We have changed dynamics in our side. We have the world powers changing their balance all over. And then, so there are realignments taking place. Afghanistan is there. So all these things are there, and we're going to put up under these circumstances how best can we have good relationship with a superpower which matters in the international forum.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.